You've noticed it before. You cancel plans. And instead of disappointment, you feel clarity. Not isolation, not sadness, just relief. And almost immediately, you wonder what that says about you. Are you withdrawing, avoiding, falling behind socially, or is something else happening entirely? Let's be precise. People who prefer solitude are not necessarily antisocial, depressed, or damaged. Sometimes they are. But often, they're simply wired for a different rhythm of engagement. And that distinction matters. There's a quiet assumption embedded in modern culture. If you're healthy, you're socially energized. If you're alone often, something must be wrong. But psychology doesn't support that simplification. Carl Jung, who first distinguished between introversion and extroversion, wasn't describing shyness. He was describing where energy is drawn from and restored. Introverts don't dislike people. They metabolize stimulation differently, and stimulation is the key word here. Social interaction is neurologically expensive. It requires continuous micro-interpretation of facial cues, emotional attunement, self-monitoring, behavioral adjustment, cognitive filtering. For some nervous systems, that cost is minimal. For others, it's significant. Research on sensory processing sensitivity, first articulated by Elaine Aron, suggests that around 15 to 20% of people process environmental input more deeply. Not dramatically, not emotionally unstable, deeply, which means a crowded dinner isn't just conversation, it's layered data, tone shifts, subtext, micro-expressions, background noise, energy fluctuations. That processing doesn't feel chaotic. It feels heavy. So when someone prefers solitude, it's often not rejection of people, it's regulation. Let's talk about a man. Call him Andy. He's competent. He maintains relationships. He shows up when it matters. But if you ask him what his ideal weekend looks like, it doesn't involve brunches or large gatherings. It involves silence, reading, walking, one deep conversation instead of 5 shallow ones. For years, he tried to override that preference. He assumed growth meant becoming more outward, more visible, more socially saturated. He performed sociability, and he was exhausted. What changed wasn't his social life. It was his interpretation of it. He stopped treating solitude like something to fix. Now, this is where nuance matters. There's a difference between chosen solitude and defensive isolation. John Cacioppo's work on loneliness demonstrated that involuntary isolation activates neural threat responses similar to physical pain. Humans are wired for connection, but needing connection does not mean needing constant exposure. Voluntary solitude has been linked to improved emotional regulation, increased creativity, stronger self-concept clarity, and higher cognitive independence. The key word is voluntary. When someone chooses solitude from fullness, they return to connection more present. When someone retreats from fear, they return more guarded. Only the individual can tell which one it is. People who genuinely prefer solitude often share certain psychological patterns. 1. High self-referential processing. They think internally before responding externally. Decisions are filtered through internal frameworks rather than group consensus. 2. Energy conservation awareness. They are acutely aware of social fatigue thresholds, not because they are fragile, because they're observant. 3. Depth preference. They gravitate toward fewer, more meaningful connections instead of broad social networks. 4. Strong internal dialogue. Time alone is not empty for them. It's active, reflective, structured. 5. Reduced social conformity pressure. Solitude strengthens identity boundaries. They're less influenced by ambient opinion. That last one is important. Solitude builds cognitive sovereignty. When you spend enough time alone, you hear your own thinking before the room edits it. That's rare, but let's not romanticize it. Solitude can turn into avoidance when social discomfort is left unchallenged. Fear of rejection becomes rationalized as preference. Withdrawal becomes the only coping strategy. If after prolonged solitude you feel increasing numbness, resentment toward connection, social skill atrophy, heightened anxiety about re-entry. That's not restoration, that's contraction. Healthy solitude expands you. Unhealthy isolation shrinks you. Be honest with yourself about which one it is. There's also a cultural layer here. We live in an era that monetizes attention and equates visibility with value. Presence is proof of relevance. In that environment, choosing quiet is misread as disengagement. But from a psychological standpoint, solitude is where integration happens. It's where emotional residue gets processed, values consolidate, identity stabilizes, creativity incubates, noise interrupts that. Constant interaction fragments it. Some people need less fragmentation. If you've always felt more yourself in silence than in crowds, consider this. That preference may not be something to defend. It may be data, your nervous system telling you the conditions under which you function optimally. The mistake isn't preferring solitude. The mistake is apologizing for it. Or worse, overriding it for years until you no longer recognize your own rhythms. Here's the more uncomfortable truth. People who are comfortable alone are often harder to manipulate. They don't rely on constant external validation, they don't panic at empty space, they don't mistake noise for intimacy, and that independence can make others uneasy. So sometimes the pressure you feel to be more social isn't about your growth, it's about other people's comfort. Know the difference. Ask yourself this. When I'm alone, do I feel restored or diminished? When I leave social settings, do I feel connected or depleted? Do I avoid people because I'm afraid? Or because I'm choosing alignment? Those answers are diagnostic. Solitude isn't a flaw, it isn't a superpower either, it's a regulatory strategy. And like any strategy, it works best when used consciously, not defensively. If any part of this felt less like information and more like recognition, then you already know something about yourself that doesn't need external validation. And that's usually where psychological maturity begins.